Good afternoon, everyone. I'm calling to order this meeting of our Housing Policy and Development Committee. My name is Cam Gordon. I'm a committee chair, joined today by council members Reich, Schrader, Ellison, and Bender. We may be joined soon by council member Goodman as well. There's 4 items on our agenda today, 2 consent items and 2 discussion items. I'm expecting the last discussion item on the encampment on Hiawatha Avenue to take up most of the meeting. I'll go ahead with the consent items and move those first. If anyone wants to pull anything on the committee, we can discuss it. The first one is passage of a resolution rescinding a previous resolution and replacing it with a new one having to do with the East Town Apartments. This is a revised bond issuance, and it's located at 815 6th Street South. And the second is referring to staff the subject matter of an ordinance that was introduced at the last council meeting, amending Title 16, Chapter 420, relating to planning and development and the Public Housing Authority. Seeing no discussion on those items. Oh, yes, Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that the staff referral for item 2 is a routine part of our procedures for introducing a new ordinance, but I know Councilmember Goodman had some questions, and she's at a community event right now in her ward, so I wondered if we might be able to pull that off for a brief discussion at the end or whenever your discretion be.
All right. I guess we could not necessarily move that. I'm not sure. We could probably still discuss it. Why don't we just move the consent and vote on it, and then if she doesn't come back, it's passed, and if she wants to discuss it, we can certainly discuss it later. Is that okay? Councilmember Schrader.
Well, I also would like to pull off number 2, just because I have some other questions. I'm happy to wait until Councilmember Goodman's back to talk about it.
Okay.
I know she's on her way from the event.
All right. Well, then on item number 1, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item carries, and let's move on to item number 3 then. And I believe Mr. Hendricks, no, Mr. Winkelhock is here to make a brief presentation. This is on our 2017 annual tax increment financing disclosure statement, and we thought the committee might benefit with some background information and some details. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, council members. My name is Mark Winkelhock. I'm the director of the Development Finance Division in the Finance Department. As many of you know, all cities in the city of Minneapolis, or Minnesota, excuse me, must report on their use of tax increment financing each year. For the year ended December 31st, 2017, city finance staff submitted 94 TIF reports, consisting of 90 reports on individual TIF districts and 4 reports on TIF debt to the Office of the State Auditor by the August 1st deadline. Additionally, the attached 2017 annual disclosure statement is being forwarded to the City Council as receive and file, and it was also sent to the Hennepin County Board, the Hennepin County Auditor, and the State Auditor's Office on August 1st, and was published in Finance and Commerce on August 10th. If you scroll down to the report, I'm just going to mention a few things. There's a lot of numbers in this report. You'll notice that there's 90 TIF districts that are reported on. They're all in alphabetical order. Of that 90, though, I should mention that only 67 of them are active. Active meaning they're actually generating tax increment every year. The other 23 have been terminated, decertified. We still have to report to them or on them because there is still some tax increment in each of the different funds, and we have to report on that till it's expended. So if you look at the 4th column, captured net tax capacity, any district that has a 0 in there has been decertified and is not active. The tax increment received column, that's the 6th column over, you can see there's a variety of different sizes of TIF districts in the city of Minneapolis. Some are big, some are small. The bulk of them, I'd say, are relatively small, 1 parcel, 1 building. They generate less than $1 million per year in increment. There's about 10 of them that fall into the medium category where there might be $1 to $3 million per year generated by the district, and there might be 2, 3, 4, 5 buildings in there. And then there's one exceptionally large TIF district, and this is the only one I want to point out on this report, and that's the consolidated district, which appears about a third of the way down on the first page. So if you look at the numbers there, they're exceptionally larger than the other ones. The captured net tax capacity, for instance, in the fourth column is about $27 million. That equates to a little over $2 billion in market value. So this is exceptionally large district. It has over 4,000 parcels in it, and it is larger than all the other 66 active districts combined. You'll also note, if you read across, that it started generating increment in 2011, and it will have to be decertified at the end of 2020. So it's only got a couple years of life left into it. That's about all I'm going to mention on the report. If you have any questions on individual TIF districts, feel free to send me an email and I can give you more details. I don't know if the overhead is working here, but a couple other slides that I just grabbed on the way over to give you a little bit of feel for how the tax increment program has evolved over the last 10 to 15 years. The number of active TIF districts was at its highest in 2008 when we had 101 TIF districts active. Now we currently have 67. So you could see over the last 10 years there's been a 34% reduction in the number of districts, predominantly because we've decertified or terminated all of those old districts that were established back in the 70s, the 80s, and the early 90s are now all decertified. Over the last 12 years, you can see that we've done 55 decertifications, predominantly the districts I just mentioned, those old ones, and we've established 24 new ones. Which averages about 2 per year is the rate that we've been establishing districts. Of those 24, 19 of them were for rental housing projects that had some affordability in it, and the other 5 were for a couple, 2, 3 commercial projects and some other special ones. So the tool has been predominantly used for rental housing with some affordability. This is a line graph showing the number of active TIF districts in Minneapolis from 2002 until 2017. The numbers are kind of small, but you can basically see the trend here is in the early 2000s we were establishing about 4 districts a year. We got up to that 101 maximum, and since then the general trend has been downward as we've decertified a fair amount of districts every other 2-3 years or so. We're down at 67. I think we've sort of leveled out at that point. We'll be decertifying at about the same rate that we are establishing unless something changes.
Do you happen to have any theories about why there was the downward trend in 2008? Did something happen there? I know there was a financial crisis.
The big drop there was because in 2009, all of the pre-79 districts, these are these very old, large districts, had to be decertified by statute. So some of this is driven by state statute, and some of it is driven by city policy. But those large drops were predominantly because those districts had reached their maximum life and they were just plain done. So.
And then I have another question. It's,
Sure.
Is there some guideline or best practices policy in terms of how much of your property taxes should be in TIP and how much shouldn't? I think sometimes we talk about, and we hear people talk about ideal maximum, and if you get above that level, it doesn't make any sense. Here we have some percentages, right? So we were at 15% for a long time, and now we're much lower. Is there something that's healthy or unhealthy about either of those numbers?
Well, that's Mr. Chair, that's interesting because the next slide I was just going to put up was the percentage of the city's tax base that lies within tax increment districts. And in the early 2000s, there was a lot of discussion about whether our percentage was too high. And as you can see from the graph, from 2002 to 2009, we were in that 14 to 16% range every single year. And so, and then we had these large number of decertifications. We had a huge drop. It bumped back up a little bit with the establishment of the consolidated TIP district, but it's generally, been coming down, and we're sort of leveled out at about 7.5%. Now, once the consolidated district goes away in a couple years, we will be below 4%. So, to answer your question, is there, some general guideline that says if you're above X, that's bad, and if you're below X, that's good? The answer is it depends who you ask. For the people who really believe that the but-for test is being followed in tax increment financing, they argue none of this value would happen anyways without the tool. For the people who believe some of it would happen anyways, you're saying, well, you're capturing value that would otherwise be on the tax base. So, but I can say at this point, as compared to other communities, particularly in the metro area, we're down in the lower area, and once we get down, in 2021, we'll probably be below 4%. We're at a pretty low level considering what other folks are doing and considering our history, of course. So, I don't know if that helps.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that council members have.
Councilmember Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's really more of a comment, but I think it's worth noting that the city of Minneapolis typically hasn't used tax increment finance in recent years on things that a lot of communities use the tool for. For example, building infrastructure in places of the city that are very rapidly growing. It's like a very classic example of how a lot of communities use tax increment finance. So if you look at formerly industrial areas of the city that are near new transit lines where we expect thousands or even tens of thousands of new residents, a lot of communities would use tax increment financing in that kind of scenario to make the investments that might help support the new population growth, pedestrian improvements, new public spaces, plazas, transit improvements, or bicycle and pedestrian access. I think I mentioned that. So, I think perhaps as we look past the comprehensive plan update and as we're planning for the next 30 years in our city, that it's a time to look at using this tool more in that sort of traditional sense, because we do have many parts of the city that are growing very rapidly, where we haven't really made the public investments that we need to realize this vision of concentrating people near good access to transit. So that's just a comment on my own personal opinion about how we might be able to use tax increment financing in the future. I think it's important to weigh the pros and cons, but I just want to say that for me, I'm open to having that discussion as we look forward the next few decades.
Well, I appreciate that. I know there are some complicated restrictions on tax increment financing, and I also know there's a tool we can use of tax abatement, which is a little bit sometimes easier because we don't have to deal with the other jurisdictions or the state necessarily. But I think this has been good to get a little picture of it today, and thank you for coming and giving us an opportunity to start the discussion, and I'm sure we'll have lots more conversations later. So with that, then, I'll move to receive and file that report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries. And I think we could either take a brief break here to discuss the Public Housing Authority ordinance. So, Councilmember, why don't we do that? Councilmember Schrader, did you have some questions?
Yes, just basically, I know that if you could talk a little bit more, there wasn't a lot on the online, so just to let people know kind of the long-term plans you had for this.
So this is an ordinance introduction. You may recall that we had a report to our committee about the kind of the, I guess, the legal framework around our relationship with the Public Housing Authority. We looked at the ordinance there and with the assistance of our city attorney's office, reviewed that. The one glaring thing that stood out was we were referencing a 1980s citizen participation program that the city were not using anymore and probably quit using back in the 1990s. We even had difficulty finding it. So there was a sense that that ordinance that hadn't been amended or updated since the 1990s needed some amending. It definitely needed to get a fresh look at community engagement in those requirements. There's also, I think there was something about quarterly reports, and there are questions about what exactly that means. And so my intention was to open it up so we could take a fresh look at it, to engage with the Public Housing Authority, and probably take several months or even a year to depending on what we want to look at. So it was no big hurry, but review the ordinance and come up with some potential amendments, and then at that time set the public hearing. So this is a small step along the way, referring it back to staff for more review. Are there any other people who have questions about item number 2? I don't see any then. All right, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. All right, we've referred that to staff. Now we'll move on to our final item, which is a report on the encampment on Hiawatha Avenue. And I think before the presentation on the report, I know that we have some of the residents of the area who wish to speak. And we also have with us Sergeant Snyder, who's been working outreach there. So I wonder if you could come up maybe and introduce, and we'll hear a little bit from some of the residents there. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, good morning, thank you. And members of the committee, thank you for allowing us to be here. This group of 5 amazing individuals had met with Councilmember Ellison and Councilmember Cano last week and provided a story and testimony that I felt was quite moving. And it was with their invitation that they come here today. And so they've prepared to speak for a few moments. And I would just like to introduce them if that's okay.
That's wonderful.
We have Rose, Serena, Jay, Shelley, and Kelly is with us today. So Rose, do you mind starting?
Welcome back. Good to see you again.
Thank you so much for being here.
Hello, thank you. My name's Rose, and I'm, here to represent all the homeless people who have been basically tenting out or anywhere else. I'm a felon, and that's one thing that stops me from getting legit housing, and I've been waiting for a while. While I was on the street, I realized that, things would happen that I never thought would happen. And I've gone through things like theft and started drinking a lot more. And I just feel like that is one thing that comes with homelessness. And I feel if we can better help people get into stable housing, that can also help slow down the crime of the street. And I don't know, I was thinking about things that we could do for that, like opening up shelters and stuff like that could help people with different things, like people who need treatment, and would like to stay with their families, or even single people housing, efficiencies for rent, and that might even take GA or whatever as rent for their rent, towards the rent. Also, there's, I don't know, restrictive housing, people who have had evictions and stuff, even more than one evictions. It's kind of like wishing that we could have case management that can understand or work with them even bi-monthly. Like me, for a fact, I don't work well with other people sometimes just because of my anxiety. I have anxiety issues, so I would like to have mental health there for support in my housing and stuff. So I don't know. I guess I've been sleeping a lot in places that weren't meant for habitation, and that's been a big thing that made my mental issues a lot harder for me to get a job or anything like that. So I would need some of a therapy to help me get job placement or prepare me for job placement, so that I might be able to be a part of the community again. And because I do have hopes and dreams and plans and want to go back to school and get on my feet again. So pretty much, just to make a long story short, it's I don't know, the best thing to do is try to get these people off the street so we don't have to continue to deal with these problems. And that's about it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Serena, would you like to go next?
Hi,
Hi,
I'm
welcome.
Serena. I've been on the street since I was 18. I'm 34. Well, I started using when my son died. He was 8 months old. And that's when I started ripping and running on the streets using. And I just haven't been able to get housing because of my background and the income. Can't get a job because of that. And so I just been wanting to rip and run on the streets because of I haven't been able to get a job because of I'm in and out of jail, and just basically the deposit, rent, don't have the money to pay, and can't get a job because of my background. And it's just hard, so I don't want to do nothing but use. And I start treatment today. So, but I wish that the Native Americans weren't on the street the way they are. Not how it's just hard to see families out there and with their kids, and they shouldn't be out there like that. And it's just hard. And I just hope we can get like shelters and lower the rent or income or something, or it's just hard. So I just hope something can get done. I don't know.
Well, thank you very much for speaking, and good luck to you in your treatment.
Jay?
My name is Jay. I've been in and out of prison all my life. That's my girlfriend right there. We finally got a place about a month ago. Moved in, got all comfortable, and then all of a sudden, he came up with the application thing, for the apartment. And once we got the application, I told him I had felonies. And he just was so money hungry. He got the money, and 5 days later, he told us we had to go. So here we go again out on the street. Me being in and out of prison, I've grown a shell towards the police and the community, feeling like I can't be anything but just do it on the street, using and carrying on. But today I can say there's an officer that really cares about us, and I know we are some strong people because we stick together every night, sleeping on the street. And with as far as the apartment thing, we got kicked back out with 2 bikes and a carrier for our clothes and our belongings. And if it wasn't for those around me, my fellow Native American brothers and sisters, I don't think I'd be standing here today. I'm so thankful that my mother has our son, and I don't know, I'm with this thing all the way to the end. With that, I'm done.
Thank you.
Kelly?
Hello, my name's Kelly.
Hello.
There's a lot of us Native Americans out here that got the same story. I've been in and out of prison most of my life. I've been sheltered ever since I was a young girl until 18. Ever since 18, I've been in and out of prison since then. Like me being in prison is like what's holding me back from getting housing right now and having a good job. I have 5 children. I don't longer have right now, which I would love to have, but me being in and out of prison is holding me back from a lot of stuff right now. But I think the housing part is a big issue for Native Americans to have so we can have structure in our life. We just need a lot of help and before it gets cold. And I would love to see like most families get in with their children before anybody else. And then also help with jobs. But like me being here today helps me know that I can move forward and hope that you guys can help get us housing before it does get cold. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here.
Shelley, did you want to? You don't want to speak? Okay. Karen?
Good afternoon.
Good
Thanks for being
afternoon.
here.
My name's Karen Pacheco, and I'm from Minneapolis, and I'm not sure if we're supposed to have testimonials or not. You know, everyone asks, what do you need? What did we do? You know, what would really help? But as you see these real strong voices here, each person has a different story, you know, why they're there. Sometimes it's addiction. Sometimes it's lack of income, you know, that can't afford the rents nowadays. Illegal evictions have happened across the board with many people. Application fees to look for apartments that you're pretty sure you're not going to get because they do credit checks and background checks and check for UDs and, it goes across the board. It takes, not too many people can pass all those, plus keep putting in these application fees, which, it gives you a sense of hopelessness. And always working with people is trying to give people a sense of hope that something will happen. I think it needs to be community-based. Whether it's shelter, I don't know. Natives typically don't like the shelters. They tend to head outside more often than not, and in bigger numbers and, for the population. So, I know there's been talk about culturally appropriate shelters, but I really wish that we just go beyond that to the permanent solution of housing, affordable housing. More beds for treatment. Looking at some alternative treatment ideas also. Some people don't, 12-step isn't for everybody. There's other treatment plans. There should be more of a choice. There's some people that have went through that program many times. It has not worked. And I think there needs to be some study into, there are other treatment programs. I'm not, I have more questions than answers. But you have to keep the community involved and engaged, and I'm talking about the camp community, that like we have here today, and engaged and give them a voice. They're not used to having a voice. And that's why you're not hearing what the problems are. Native people will just tend to walk away and take care of themselves the best way they can. And we are a refugee camp. And I think that needs to be acknowledged. Minneapolis has a refugee camp that's growing by 5 to 10 families a night. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you so much.
Mr. Chair, Shelley asked me to say just a couple of words on her behalf. She's more comfortable with that. She wanted to relate that she is struggling and has been attempting to get into treatment since January, and that she's had a number of experiences of overdosing, and she's really wrestling with this process of being actually able to get into treatment. And I wanted to just relate those words to her because she didn't feel comfortable saying it on her own. There was also one other additional person that asked if she was able to speak. She's from the Little Earth community.
That's fine.
Hi, good afternoon.
Afternoon.
My name is Ashlyn Delgado. Fortunately, today I can say that I'm escaped homelessness due to Little Earth, the income-based housing program near the campsite. I'm here today actually to represent my family who actually, two of them passed away being homeless behind Lake Street before the camp was brought to attention. And the other one is actually still he moved to Rapid City, which is my father. And he currently was homeless in the camps, and he moved back to Rapid to try and find assistance in our tribe. I guess today I'm here to just speak about our history that a lot of us don't really get educated about in school, knowing that, our families, my grandma in specific, who was homeless and passed away being homeless in 2002, she was part of the boarding school era. And a lot of that happened, was really, really bad, obviously with the sexual assaults and all of the abuse that happened, and that took away our history and being a Native American and knowing how to survive. And from there, moving forward, it taught the generations after them, not only abuse, but it also didn't help us being able to adjust and assimilate ourselves back into the community to get, jobs and trust the education system and trust being able to maintain that mental assistance with our health and trust the doctors and trust medications. And that's why a lot of these, a lot of us, including myself, Native Americans, that we are hesitant to be able to try that situation with other people because it's hard. After, being killed off, literally genocide after genocide, we have the Dakota 38 that happened in Minnesota that just got brought to attention this last 10 years. We have, the Wounded Knee Massacre, which my family in specific wasn't, our survivors. My son is the Dakota 38 survivor as well, from his grandma's. And all of that just happened. So for us today, I'm here just to remind us that it's new. It's something new to our families, our Oyate here today. And it's something that we all need to think more, even, other people think less of a reservation and more like a nation, so we can be together and actually help, because we all know Minnesota is cold. And, there are kids out there. There truly are children out there. And it is really heartbreaking. So, just want to leave that thought right there, thinking like a nation, not a reservation. Thank you. We'll be back.
I don't see anybody else or, okay. All right.
Hi, I'm Margarita Ortega. I've worked with many of you over the past few years. This issue is not new. This has been going on for decades, and I want you guys to understand that just because it turned into a campment now doesn't mean that it's a new issue. We're banding together as a people, and we're working together to try and help our people, but we need your help. We need you guys to step up. You talk about being progressive, be progressive, do something new, make a change, because we're not changing anything. The housing crisis is still here. Gentrification is occurring rapidly. While I was door knocking, all I kept hearing is, I can't live here. I can't move here. I can't stay here. Rents keep rising. Well, guess what? It's happening everywhere. And it's not just Native Americans at that camp. We're taking in people from all different races and backgrounds. And you got to understand, Native Americans, we're multiracial. So you might be Native American. You've been here for many generations. You may have Native blood in you. Honor that, because you are a part of us. This land is a part of us. You're a part of us, and we need you. We need you. So that's why we're here. And I need you guys to all know what it feels like to live in a tent. I lived it for 4 years of my life. I know what it feels like. Displacing them at the end of the month is not a solution. And it cannot happen. And we won't allow it to happen. Not as a community. So I want you guys to understand this situation is real. And we're not going anywhere until we all work together to come up with a solution. And if you don't want to do the Roof Depot site, you need to find another solution because the cold is coming. It's coming. And it's not going to sit there and wait for politicians and politics and backroom talks. It's not going to wait. Abdi's been dealing with this situation by himself for how long in his district? It's time for all of you guys to step up and help. It may not be your district, but what if we move the camp to yours? You guys are all a part of this situation. It may not be in your district, but you have part in it. You have accountability to it. You guys all help create this problem. Now let's all help to fix it. And I need your guys' help to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who's you, Chairman, City, or the Council? James Cross, founder of Natives Against Heroin. We're out there daily. We're out there making it safe for our people. It's not a sad story, it's a good story. We're not homeless today, right? We got tents. We're together. It's a family. I mean, it's like, if you ain't been out there, come out there and see. You can hear about it, but when you see it, it's a whole lot different. And we're telling you, if you ain't going to do what you guys were supposed to do to help this problem with shelters, we're going to start building. We're going to start building. And we're ready to go to war. We'll put our war paint on. Fill your county jail. And this week, the first teepee will come up. Because I want to let you guys know, when we talk and we're yelling for emergency help for shelters and medical, and it ain't coming, the blood's on your hand. The blood's on your hand. You got that power to make changes and make policies. We got barriers out there. We just had an OD last night. The ambulance couldn't come through. It's not like throwing a hot dog in a hallway. They can't get through. We got to get those barriers out of there. This ain't about politics. This is about real life. So please wake up, have a heart, and understand we're the first people. We belong here. So respect us.
So I'm about ready to move on to the staff presentation. I'm not sure if we had all of the residents who spoke, so maybe you can be our last speaker.
Yes, I'll agree to that. I'm just here to emphasize the need for Roof Depot site. There is no other option. There is no other site that can house this many people in this short of an amount of time that you guys are asking for September 30th. The Roof Depot site has the space, it has the utilities, it has electricity, it has the plumbing, and it's an open available site right now. It's in the location in the community, and it's also a site that Epic East Phillips Community Coalition has been working on to make a community-based center to begin with. And the city has been getting pushback from the city, and we as a community has been asking this site for a place that we can use as a community hub for resources, for employment, for aquaponics garden to feed the community, to house the community, to employ the community. So I'm telling you guys right now, is like this Roof Depot site is a really big issue. And if you do not support the Roof Depot site, please consider the next election seats vacating.
So I think the committee needs to get some more information. I think we're hearing about sites for just recently. So I think that's it's good to hear people's comments coming in here and to understand that better. But I suspect our staff's also been hearing about different sites and locations and looking at things and some strategies. I know that there was a report at the Public Safety Committee, and I actually want to thank the chair of Public Safety Committee who's joined us today, Andrew Cano, for referring this to the Housing Committee. What I'm hoping we get to drill into a little bit now is the housing part of this and what are the housing solutions and what can we do to address the situation and the needs that's there. And also our city coordinator has been tasked with coordinating appropriately this effort, and so has also been working with other staff throughout the city and other jurisdictions and other entities in the community, and is prepared to give us a presentation and an update, and I think have some recommendations for us. So welcome.
Thank you, Chair Gordon, and members of the committee. My name is Nuria Rivera Vandermide, and I'm the city coordinator. And I just want to, before I start, just acknowledge the strength and the depth and the profoundness of the words of folks that came today to speak to City Council. It is why we have been thinking hard and partnering with community and to figure out what can we do, because the sense of urgency that has been expressed is real to us as well, and we are trying to find options, not just for now, not just for a problem that is epitomizing a larger problem, but thinking beyond that to say, what are we going to do in general for all of our communities who are facing homelessness? We have the benefit, as we started to look into this, of having some research and thinking about what is happening across the nation. We had the National Law Center for Poverty and Homelessness issued a report just recently, and we were so fortunate to think about it. But as somebody was mentioning, this is not just a problem that's happening today. It is not just a problem that is happening here. It is a problem that is happening all over the nation as we face kind of an increasing crisis of homelessness and the unsheltered. Part of that has to do with how the affordable housing crisis is hitting communities, and that is being reflected. As you can see, the Tent City USA, the growth of America's homelessness, encampments, and how communities are responding. They tracked 187 cities particularly, but did a survey in 2016. And you can see that the growth of encampments has grown from 19 in 2007 to 274 as of last year, and they're already growing. As of mid-2017, at the time of this report, there were already 255. It is a growing issue. As we see some of the trends on encampments, they are showing that they are growing in size as well. That whereas perhaps in the past you may have seen 2 tents, 3 tents, 5 tents, you are now seeing a larger group of tents that have over 100 residents. They're becoming permanent, semi-permanent features of cities. And close to 2/3 of the reports which recorded at the time of this report said they had been there for a year or more. For most, the way in which cities respond to them is varied, and we'll get into some of those municipal responses. But where you see a lot of that is the criminalization of encampments, and there is now a slow trend of dealing with encampments in a more humane and a more dignified manner. We also saw that while 80% of all encampments are found in only 7 states, with California being by far the state with the highest concentration, with 129 camps out of the 220 that comprise this 80% cluster. The next highest was Indiana with 26. I wanted to also share some data about relevant Hennepin County. How does that relate to where we sit right now in time? I should mention that you're going to hear a lot from me right now, and I apologize for that, but we have colleagues and folks with us from other departments and other jurisdictions, and in particular, I'll highlight David Hewitt is here, Director of the Office to End Homelessness, and we stole some of their data, so thank you, David, to share out a little bit about what this looks like for Hennepin County and for Minneapolis. So we've got available shelter beds, and they have an average occupancy rate of about 98%. That tells you something right there, that where we think about where are folks going to go, that there is an issue of capacity as we look at that. We also see that there is some data about what it costs about operating a 50-bed shelter and the cost of outreach workers. And I name that because as we continue to think about recommendations, that is part where our coalition partners, the state, the city, obviously, and the county can try to help move us forward. That is an annual cost.
Thank you.
I wanted to highlight, and I won't spend a lot of these times on the more kind of academic slides, but to say that the United States Interagency Council on Homelessness, they're an excellent resource. They have published a guidebook, really, Ending Homelessness for People Living in Encampment and Advancing the Dialogues, and there are some principles about how to move forward in a way that really honors community, meets them where they're at, and figures out how to really do a better implementation plan than simply criminalizing encampment behavior. And as so many people here reflected, the last one, the provision of low barrier pathways to permanent housing, is a key one, thinking about those issues, whether it's affordability or whether it's felony convictions on your record. Those are the things that we really must tackle. They don't happen overnight, but if we don't tackle those, we will continue to be in this situation time and time again. But I don't say that lightly, and as we think of solutions, I also take the same U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness also cautions us that as we're thinking about what solutions to find, think about those solutions that are really gearing us to be more permanent in nature. There are some jurisdictions that have sanctioned encampments or safe zones, and while they have not outright said that is the wrong approach, they have certainly cautioned people to say that that diverts attention from the real issues of finding people a path to permanent housing, finding better options out there. And so there are some caveats about creating these environments that they share out and that we have thought about as we've been discussing some of this information. I mentioned earlier that we took that look and that we looked at that survey of how municipalities, how do cities deal with this? And one of the questions that had been asked of me was to think about and look at best practices and think about how other folks had dealt with this situation. And I am hopeful to see that there are some communities that have addressed homelessness in more positive ways, but there is a big group in the majority of jurisdictions really move to more punitive criminalization approach. The majority of jurisdictions have anti-camping laws and disillusion camps without an attendant need to think about how do we do outreach, how do we do services, how do we move forward. There are a few jurisdictions that have some notice and some shelter requirements, some storage requirements, because that is something that we've learned too, as we were talking about the unsheltered, that is a barrier where you do not have a place to put your belongings or do not want to leave your belongings. That becomes problematic when you're trying to access services or job training or jobs for that nature. There are a few jurisdictions that have legalized encampment sites. There are only 3 of the 187 that did this survey. Most of those are all 3 of them are all privately owned, although one of them does have that available on city-owned land. But most of those have been where religious organizations have allowed it to host an encampment under statute. There are 3 open-air shelters or courtyards that are interesting, and the appendix to this report, there are pictures of those. San Antonio, has what they call a haven for hope. Again, part of this is the weather, that they're able to have open courtyards, but they have figured out how to provide a safe space for a community who are facing homelessness and hopefully giving an intensive case management approach so that people can find other services and be able to find stability elsewhere. And finally, I'd say there's a handful of cities that have taken to looking at tiny homes or micro homes, what we might call ADUs for any given day. And so where those have worked, and there again is some caution to not simply build these types of tiny homes without, some of them do not have water facilities. And if they're built in isolation and not in community, then that is just moving down a problem down the road. Where we have seen some of the, and again, in the appendix to this, there are pictures of that, where we have seen some of that be most successful is where there has been lots where there are tiny home or micro home communities that allow for medical services and sanitation services and so forth. Most of those are, again, and I have some costs here, highly expensive, mostly funded by private entities, not public entities, but these are in the gamma of things that we have seen out there in the universe of other cities and states are on the table as options. I want to turn a little bit to, as we had looked at all these options and as we were thoughtful, we came to, it has really been an opportunity. I've been tasked with this for about 3 weeks now, and it's been extraordinary to work in partnership with a group of folks, both in community and with our government agencies. And you can see the list of partners that we have here, and some of them here from the Metropolitan Urban Indians Directors to the Natives Against Heroin, to folks that have been in the AICDC and the MnDOT and Hennepin County. I mean, the list is here, but there are more people in the shadows, I'm sure, that have been serving this community as we have tried to figure out how to best to access what they need and give some solutions to the options. So I just wanted to share this out. But importantly, there was a meeting last Friday that were about 75 people strong. My understanding was, I was not able to be there, but my understanding is that there was a coalition. It was a group of folks, both people from the camp, folks from Natives Against Heroin, folks from community organizations, leadership from MUD, the mayor, tribal leadership who was there. And there were some concepts that were agreed upon about that meeting that you see in this picture that's here. And one of them is some recognition that the current location of the encampment is not ideal. It is not sustainable. We want to make sure that people are safe. Someone in community had mentioned that they are just a car crash away from a tragedy. It is a situation we really want to try to resolve in a way that is safe, but in a way that provides some option for shelter. This is not a situation where we as a city are coming in and saying, all right, everybody has to scatter. This is no longer a site for encampment. So we're trying to be thoughtful about what that looks like. There's some other things in here, which is a recognition of MUD leadership as a point of contact with NAW as part of the advisory committee. And I say that because that partnership, and I think the work we have done in concert, NAW is on the ground in the camp, really talking to community and residents in the encampment in really deep ways. MUD leadership has been working hard with us to talk about community organizations and really stepping up to think about what are the greater needs and how do we move forward from here. We would not be able to be in a place where we are right now without the leadership of so many people here, and I just wanted to recognize that and say that out loud. So I want to talk a little bit about what we've done so far and what some of our recommendations are as we've been tasked with a plan. Again, if I look back, I'll see that we were going to do a living and dynamic co-created plan by Tuesday. We have talked with NAW, we have talked with MUD as we are moving this forward, and they in turn went into their community to think about what does that look like. And we have, I think, the outlines of a plan that we share with you today. But I'll say that part of that plan is also about retaining the stability of the campsite as we have right now. Gretchen Musigan, our Commissioner of Health, is here, and she can respond to some questions about the medical needs of the encampment as she comes up in a bit. But I'll say that we continue to provide portable toilets and hand washing stations, garbage. We're trying to increase that service for it. We've installed some lights and increasing police presence at the request of community. We're continuing to coordinate with local care providers to assist with ongoing medical services. So far, and I believe David Hewitt can speak to this in a little bit more detail as well, but Hennepin County and their partners have done 65 housing assessments, resulting in 30 housing referrals. And so we continue to work on that. Our commitment moving forward is to continue to do all of that work that supports the folks that are in the encampment right now, but also to continue to contract to provide culturally and trauma-informed healing at the Hygiene Service Center that was recently created. It opened, I believe, about a week ago or two across the street from the encampment. It provides showers and a centralized place by which folks can get services or some medical attention. Mobilizing additional outreach workers to facilitate assessment and referrals. We know that there is a need for additional outreach workers to make these referrals and these assessments go faster and quicker and deeper as more and more people have come to the encampment. Coordinating with healthcare providers to provide hepatitis vaccinations, rapid testing for infectious diseases, and flu shots And so we're working to move that fairly quickly. We're hoping to be able to provide that this week, or at least in that order, hepatitis vaccinations being sort of an order of priority as we move forward. Again, we are continuing conversations, and you can certainly, again, ask our Commissioner of Health more information on these, but continuing to coordinate with healthcare organizations to make sure we've got more mobile or agile medical assistance, whether that is a medical mobile unit or the creation of a tent that is dedicated to medical services, what that looks like. And then one of the things that we wanted to really think about is coordinating to provide temporary storage solutions. And this issue of, storage continues to come up, and I wanted to show these because it's two-pronged. One is finding temporary storage solutions for those at the camp. What we're hearing somewhat is that some folks in the encampment don't want to leave their belongings behind. Someone had mentioned there is, and I don't want to say that's at this camp, but because they're experienced perhaps in other shelters, that there is concern about leaving their belongings behind and may not go to the hygiene service area, or may not in other instances of folks being not necessarily at the encampment, they will not go to a job training center or are not able to access medical services because they don't have a place to put their belongings. So one of the things I wanted to point out is some novel things that we are committing to, and our Public Works Department is actually reaching out and looking for some permanent solutions. We want to prototype permanent storage at permanent lockers throughout the city. You'll see this first image on the screen, and I apologize for those in the audience because it's small, but it is also in the packets. This is an example of one of the first ones, the earliest ones to do it. It is a locker system, 12 lockers in Portugal, and the innovative thing about that is that it has a mail slot, so it could serve as a residency place. It can serve as a place to send mail. There are some other lockers. Some churches have Rubbermaid bins that are just numbered, so this can go from very sophisticated to less so. But we really want to explore this because we want community to be able to access it 24/7. It does no good to store your belongings and then have to be able to get it out of there at 8 or 9 at night because the church or the shelter or the facility that you're at is going to close their doors. So we want to really try to provide 24 access to storage in community when folks need it the most. So we're excited to move forward on that as we continue to think of options. The other interesting phenomenon that we have found in different jurisdictions is this creation of a navigation center to provide emergency transitional services to those that are perhaps hardest to connect with the traditional shelter system. We've heard some of those barriers today, whether it is folks that have felony convictions or that have UDs, or that perhaps can't afford rent, or in certain circumstances may be struggling with addiction. These are folks that we cannot leave behind, that have the hardest time trying to find traditional shelter housing. And so what we have seen in other jurisdictions is that they have made what they call navigation centers. They are a place that we are hoping to transition folks from the encampment to, which is finding a site. And I know that the issue of a site continues to be something that we are mightily working on to find a location, but it is a centralized place where we can find safe beds and encompass and put an intense case management approach to really get people to what they need to go to. As someone was mentioning, it is not a blanket. Everybody has different needs, everybody has different realities, and we want to make sure that we spend some time in an environment so that we can make sure that we get the referrals that are right. These navigation centers can be a variety of things. You'll see I've included some pictures here. San Francisco and San Diego have used a tented structure, what I used to call from my old correctional days a sprung structure. We used it in Puerto Rico, for example, when there are hurricanes to provide emergency shelter. The example of San Francisco is one of those where we used to house folks. Other folks, San Diego also has a navigation center that they took, the picture on the left-hand side, they took an empty warehouse building and made that an immediate emergency location to do this navigation center. Another place in Seattle took an abandoned building, an empty vacant building, and turned that into a navigation center as well. So one of our initial recommendations is to zero in on those possible locations and try to have a site opened by early October. That is our commitment to try to move folks out from the current property on the encampment, and mostly because A, winter is coming, and B, it is just unsafe. And so we have been working with our county partners, with our state partners. I know CPED has been working diligently to try to find a location that we could use. And I can say that while no location is off the table, we want to make sure that we are responsible about exploring what would work.
So we heard earlier people talked about the Roof Depot site. Is that on the table?
It is on the table. I would say that it is not necessarily the most optimum site. I understand that its proximity to community is great, but I also think that I wouldn't want to close doors and just take the site that's available. There are zoning issues, there are mold issues in the facility, there are a variety of other issues that we want to deal with. But I won't say also that we'll take anything off the table right now. The urgency that we feel to house people is important.
And can I just ask a couple questions, because we now seem to be on the Navigation Center, which is a big, I think a big recommendation for us to be thinking about. Are these tent structures heated then? It can be heated, and can they withstand cold?
Chair Gordon and committee members, absolutely, they can. The ones that we have seen have been seen in, the pictures I portrayed were more in the western coast, but Michigan has used them, Chicago has used them. They can be equipped with heat and cooling. We've actually have some ourselves in our emergency management. They're much smaller. They would not fit a variety of people, but we have used them ourselves for emergency settings when we needed to.
And have you checked on the cost of these tents?
We have. There are larger ones. We're looking to see what a cost of a larger sprung unit is, and that information hasn't come to me yet, although I expect it will soon. I know that the smaller ones that we have in the emergency management area that fit maybe 20 people, if we were to put cots in there, it's about $20,000, but there are some efficiencies in cost for size, and so we will be getting that, and part of our recommendation is to come forward with some funding options for you as soon as we've got those settled.
Do we have a commitment from anybody like the county to provide services and cover the operation inside the facility? Or
Chair Gordon, I think it's a conversation that we have had with the county. I think that we would be partnering with the county. This is something that we know that there's services that we need to do. We would need to provide case management, and at least I have a verbal commitment from the county to operate as much as we need to in this navigation center. I don't want to put David on the spot, so I don't want him to be responsible for the county. If he had additional information, he can certainly share it when he's speaking, but I'll say that I have spoken to leadership at the county, and we are all collectively trying to move forward with an obligation to say who can run this. And we would partner with hopefully a community organization that would be able to provide that service.
Okay. Councilmember Ellison.
Oh, and I just wanted to ask, are we sort of looping in MPS, as I know that there are quite a few MPS students who are in the encampment as well, so are they in the loop and a part of the conversations about services and moving forward and all that?
Chair Gordon, Councilmember Ellison, thanks so much. We have a contact at MPS. We were particularly in close contact with them at the start of school season. They were really helpful in trying to get students registered. They offer to give supplies. We have actually spoken to them about possibly using a school, for example, as an emergency shelter, and that one perhaps was not as positive in the affirmative as we move forward, but we have approached all our partners with as many asks as we can, but I can tell you that MPS has been at the table and trying to help secure students as we move forward.
Yes, Councilmember Schrader has a question too. How about, and we should get you a card. Okay, Councilmember Schrader.
Sure, this might be a question for Mr. Hewitt, but I just wanted to hear a little bit about how the navigation centers are kind of tuned into kind of our coordinated point of entry.
Mm-hmm. I think I will leave this to Councilmember Schrader.
Chair Gordon, Councilmember Schrader, council members.
Go ahead.
So I want to answer that question. I first of all just want to very quickly say I think the on-the-ground mobilization that has been occurring on the site through Natives Against Heroin in particular, who've been there every day from the outset, the American Indian Community Development Corporation outreach team, St. Stephen's, Healthcare for the Homeless and others has been incredible. Everyone is stretched very thin. This is a crisis. It is not a new one, to a point that was raised earlier. And our role has really been to try and coordinate between those agencies that are doing the front-end assessment and then supportive housing providers on the back end. So very relevant to the question about coordinated entry system. Other navigation centers, and San Francisco is the most famous example, have very closely linked their navigation centers to coordinated entry and to those pathways into supportive housing. They've generally operated as very low barrier shelters, which is key. We talk about the 3 Ps often with this: pets, partners, possessions, as being critical things that a lot of shelters are not able to accommodate and that make it easier for people to come in who may not have been able to access traditional shelters, as is often the case with folks that we're seeing at the encampment. I'd like to very quickly, there was some numbers earlier that I can update a tiny bit, which will also, I think, illuminate some of the constraints that we're operating within. At this point, so I think 60 assessments were referenced in the slide. I was at the hygiene service area earlier, and we're now pushing 100 housing assessments. The challenge, of course, is we can do housing assessments all day, every day with people coming in, but it's the supply of housing available on the back end. So the number of referrals that was up there was 30. That has crept up to 35 with some new options that became available this week. These are supportive housing programs in our community. For some context for those who aren't familiar with these systems, I do want to throw out that they are not necessarily fast or simple either, though. A lot of our permanent supportive housing is actually a form of rental subsidy and ongoing services, but we still need to find the physical unit and landlord to take people, and you've heard very eloquently about a lot of the barriers that exist in a housing market like the one we face here. So we currently have 35 people in the pipeline for permanent supportive housing or other forms of supportive housing. 5 people have got into some of the lowest barrier housing that does exist in our community, again through the American Indian Community Development Corporation. Of the 35 in the pipeline, we're worried about 10 breaking down. There are a lot of challenges as we work through these processes with people. So I just want to put out there that we can connect people to these systems. There isn't enough housing at the end of it, and the process is not necessarily as fast or as easy to navigate as we would like. And just again, I think a couple of points that came up in the presentation, again, being there earlier and seeing the demand come in and the number of people on the ground, it's an incredible mobilization. We are stretched very thin, particularly for that kind of outreach and navigation part of the process.
Councilmember Connell.
Thank you, Councilor Member Gordon. I appreciate your ability to take this issue on, and I appreciate your time, Councilmember Jeremiah Ellison's time, and our Council President's time in working on this issue over the last couple of days, perhaps weeks now. And thank you to Councilmember Abdi Warsame for being here as part of this conversation. I'm honored to have U.S. residents here today. It takes a lot to get down here and to testify, and so I'm really privileged to be a part of this journey with you to figure out how we're going to solve this issue. I've also just wanted to say that I've been extremely impressed with the work of our Sergeant Snyder here, whose I think trust and reputation in the community has earned us today the ability to hear the stories of our community members who are not often shared. And so I just want to focus a little bit because we're hearing a lot of numbers and statistics and paper and things and ideas. And for me, being the council member for Ward 9, I want to work in partnership with Councilmember Abdi Warsame, whose ward the encampment is in, to remind us that winter is coming. And so we have a timeline to make a decision. Ideally, we would get something together and located within the next 3 weeks. And I also just want to share that when I met with the residents last week, Shelley, if it's okay with you, I think your baby's due in November, right? And so we have that timeline too. So I just want to remind us that we are on native land. We are on your land. And we need to make a decision that you are supporting and that you're advocating for today. I believe that this is your land. I believe that it's my responsibility to represent you on this council. I hope the rest of our council members do too. It's not a coincidence that a majority of the residents at the camp are Native American. That's not a coincidence. There are deep structural issues that we need to address, that we have the power to address today at this meeting. We have all of the assets, all of the privilege at our disposal to address the situation, give it a clear solution, and give it direction. I do not want to see us wait for the county to respond. I do not want to see us wait for Minneapolis Public Schools to make up their mind. I do not want to see us wait for MPHA to come up with an idea. We have land currently under our disposal, 7 acres in my ward, which is the Roof Depot site, which the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors Group has sent a letter to all of us that I shared with you, asking for that site to be a place where the encampment could go. You do not have any opposition from the sitting council member of doing that. Residents, in fact, from East Phillips are saying this is the best idea ever. So I just want to reiterate to us that this land belongs to Indigenous people and that we have a responsibility to make the racial equity decision today that's going to clearly set us on course to find homes for the folks that, yes, in the next 3 weeks would be transitional, but commitment to ensure that Shelley has a home to raise her child, where you can continue to do your work in your community and bring your children back to you. Where I know, Karen, you've been doing a lot of work too in the community, where we can be building neighborhoods together and be together as residents. So for me, I'm 100% behind the Roof Depot idea. I think the question of how we make it happen is more of a logistical dance that we need to have with each other and to recognize our privilege and to make that happen. I don't think that it's rocket science to figure out how to make this happen within the next 3 to 4 weeks. And with that, I will say that I've been very thankful for the work that Nuria has led as our city coordinator. I've seen her, through emails and in meetings and conversations and rushing from here to there, really owning this issue and giving it depth and bringing all the different players together. And now I think it's our turn as policymakers to really make a commitment and put our votes where our mouths are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know that there's some more presentation to go, and I don't see any other questions or comments right now. Oh, Councilmember Goodman.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chair. What other presentations are left to go?
No, it's just this presentation to finish. There's about 5 more slides, I think, possibly 6. So that navigation center is one of the recommendations, and there might be some more.
Okay.
I think we're going to let the staff do their presentation now, but we can certainly deal with that one-on-one after the meeting too, or a conversation.
Except there may be something wrong with the whole presentation. Is that okay?
Well, we'll definitely want to hear about that after the meeting.
My question is do we have we taken into consideration refugee camps that are along the border on the south? We have multiple refugee camps that do this type of thing, and they're not listed in this at all.
All right, so maybe we can answer that in the rest of the presentation and let us know.
Chair Gordon, thank you. I'll say that we certainly have looked at some of those. Some of those use the same structures. We did not, for example, have all 274 encampment options in here. We've got some tiny home communities. We don't have them all. There are a variety of options that exist as we have seen that, and just for the sake of trying to get a presentation in the brevity, we did not list them all here, but we are acknowledging of that. I want to say that as we continue to think about, again, those options and trying to find those funding sources, that we know as a group that the Navigation Center is but one solution. It is an immediate solution right now to the fact that winter is coming and a sense of urgency about what that looks like. But beyond it, the encampment has highlighted more systemic issues. And we have talked about looking at, and again, we have talked about this, we've heard it through community, that the current shelter system perhaps is not as culturally informed or oriented as it could be. And so thinking about developing a new culturally focused and informed transitional housing program really aimed and focused at the Native American community would be one of the commitments that we would like to make moving forward. That too, we're working to identify, that's a longer term issue, but we're looking to identify site options for this culturally focused model, and that we will again report back to council, but we are working not just ourselves in the city, but with our county and our state partners, along with our community partners as we move that forward. So that is a second prong of a recommendation. We also think that there is a variety of options as we continue to think about it. We want to affirm our commitment to work collaboratively. This issue, again, has highlighted not just the issues of this encampment, but it has highlighted the issues of the unsheltered and the homeless in general. So we want to make sure that we learn from this. If we do not learn the lessons of this encampment, then we have done ourselves a disservice. So we want to see what has worked well. And for me, again, I have to say that the collaboration with community and with community leadership has been essential to us moving forward and to being able to provide quickly and act and react quickly when there is a need at the camp. The other opportunity that's come up is convening with tribal council leaders and other organizations from across the state to continue to deepen relationships and increase partnerships. We saw a variety of tribal council leaders and organizations come to the city, come to the encampment. How do we help our people? As I have heard from many folks in community, and I will channel a little bit of Robert Lilligren, former council member. How do we help our relatives as we are here? And I really take that to heart. How do we continue to deepen those relationships? And I think that's an important part of this. There are a variety of things as we continue to think about shortening homelessness by developing constructive alternatives to criminalization. It is one of those recommendations that we saw in that earlier report, but continuing to work with our community partners to think about how do we, instead of just simply saying you must leave this site right now today, how do we think about how do we assist you into accessing services and moving to a place that will be safer for you, will be better for you, and perhaps will get you onto a path of permanent housing as we move forward. We want to continue to think about a shelter system that really thinks about housing first approach, which is a model that many jurisdictions have shifted to. And again, some of these I'm going to start talking about, and I will leave my colleagues, both David Hewitt and Andrea Brennan, to talk a little bit more about it. But thinking about how we think about not just housing first, but people first. Really thinking about what the individual needs are for folks that are coming to the shelter system, and what is it that we can do differently to make sure that we can align the individual's needs with the availability of resources. A series of these are recommendations that some of them are in the pipeline and some of them are for the longer term issues that contribute to homelessness. Preventing homelessness by strengthening housing protections and elimination of unjust convictions. I know that there are several efforts in the pipeline, and I nod specifically to Council President Lisa Bender and Jeremiah Ellison, who have proposed, are doing a working ordinance on renters protection, and that too will help and contribute to ending chronic homelessness as we move forward. I also note that the mayor's proposed budget includes funds to launch a new pilot to provide legal representation in housing court to low-income renters facing evictions, to increase funding for legal services to help tenants enforce their rights to habitable housing, to increase funding for a tenant hotline information and referral services, and includes a $3.4 million to preserve naturally occurring affordable housing. Another recommendation is to continue to think about ending homelessness by taking steps to increase access to and availability of affordable housing. And my now new friend David Hewitt has said that those earning 30 AMI and less is the target, the sweet spot. It is really for the people that make the lowest or to no income, as Councilmember Cano has remarked to me. Continuing to support and act on a city policy that writes down the cost of city-owned land to support affordable housing, and continuing to fund local housing trust funds are examples of these. And the mayor's 2019 budget proposal has more than doubled city investments in the city's affordable housing trust fund, and includes $3.3 million towards stable homes, stable schools, a collaboration with Minneapolis Public Schools, public housing, and Hennepin County to stabilize kids and their families that are or at risk of experiencing homelessness. Continuing to work with the Minnesota Department of Veterans, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, and the Minnesota Assistance Council for Veterans in support of the individualized by name community approach that has halved the number of veterans experience homelessness since 2014 and helped more than 700 veterans access permanent housing at that time. These are some of the examples that Hennepin County has shared with us about moving forward on trying to address the issue of homelessness. Furthering integration of housing and employment services is pioneered through the 100-day challenge on youth homelessness that helped 236 youth into housing and 157 into employment, education, and training in order to provide both housing stability and pathways into careers. Building out the community's coordinated entry system to more effectively and efficiently match services to individual needs, which has helped more than 150 people with the longest histories of homelessness and greatest vulnerabilities and disabilities move into permanent housing in the last 12 months. Increasing coordination between homelessness and housing services and other mainstream services as a state, county, and community Minor Connect pilot that is offering a new model to support for 15 and 17-year-olds experience homelessness through partnership with child welfare and child protection resources and systems. Continuing to expand the variety of housing support programs available through the state, county, and community partners. And one more. For those in need of help with housing cost and support services, again, we have talked a lot about what is that affordability cost option. This includes long-term homeless housing first permanent supportive housing program, the new housing with services independent model for those leaving congregate settings, and support for low barrier culturally specific housing such as the American Indian Community Development Corporation COLA project. And finally, continuing to invest in upstream prevention and new permanent supportive housing developments, such as the forthcoming Minnehaha Townhomes partnership between Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, the city, and the county to provide more options for families and continue the downward trend of family homelessness, which has declined by more than 40% since 2014. Those last are really mostly county or partnerships that the county has put forward, and I'll defer to David if you have questions from them. I don't need to go into all of these, but I'll share that in the appendix. We talked a little bit about those short to mid-term housing options. I mentioned 3 jurisdictions that had these courtyard opportunities. San Diego has a industrial tent that holds up to 325 people. San Diego. San Antonio has what they call Haven for Hope. And Las Vegas has recently modeled their courtyard after the Haven for Hope model in San Antonio. And just again, as an example, these are longer term options down the road, but just so that you know in your packet, we've got a series of tiny homes or micro villages. All of those have different costs to them, all have different possibilities, but where they have worked the best are where there are community services attached to it, where there is a sense of not a one-off, but a community where this has worked. With that, council members, I'm certainly happy to stand for questions. I'll just note again that we've got CPED available. We've got David Hewitt from the county available, and he may, I don't know if he has some additional information to share out, but if not, he's certainly willing to stand for questions. Commissioner Musicant is here, and she can certainly speak to some of the medical issues, but there is also another request that has been made at this committee about speaking about supervised injection sites, and she is ready to speak on that as well.
Thank you very much. I don't see any questions right now. What I'd like to do, I would like to acknowledge, though, a couple people who are here, Robert Lilligren and Mary Lagarde from the Urban Indian Directors Group, and also Tony Stilday from Red Lake. Appreciate you being here. I think I'm going to move to make a staff direction based on your recommendations right now and let the committee have some discussions, and we'll see if there's questions unless somebody wants to take some time for something else. Councilmember Ellison.
I would like to hear just a little bit about the supervised injection sites, maybe before we jump in any decision making, just because I think it's it's an important part of this whole equation potentially.
Maybe our health commissioner would like to.
If I may, Councilmember Gordon, I was remiss in sharing the podium with Robert Lilligren, if you don't mind, if he spoke and said a few words.
That's fine, briefly.
I mean, I realize this meeting's running really long, and the council member asked about the injection site, so I'm happy to make a few remarks after that, or not, whatever works best for the committee.
How about some brief remarks after the health commissioner?
Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the committee, Mr. Chair. My name is Gretchen Musicant. I'm the Commissioner of Health. We were asked to do some research on supervised injection sites, and you do have a one-page fact sheet, I believe. Looks like this. I just, before I summarize that, I just want to place it in context with the other work that we're doing. With the encampment, just the sheer number of people that are living in a place that was not designed for habitation, our first priorities have been hygiene and safety. And as you've heard, we've arranged for toilets and hand washing and potable water and waste pickup and sharps containers. Our second priority is infectious diseases, and so we've tried to again prioritize within that, looking at hepatitis A vaccine, which we hope to be in the field being offered to folks this week. Also offering some testing for other infectious diseases like HIV, AIDS, hepatitis C, and syphilis. And then a third priority, with the emerging flu season, we'd also like to make vaccine for that available. Our preferred approach to cut down on fragmentation is to provide these services at the hygiene site, where there are showers and a service tent. And we understand there are up to 60 visitors per day. We are, however, willing to explore other methods of service delivery on a case-by-case basis. In addition to those priorities, we are also aware that there are some acute medical needs. Right now, Hennepin County Health Care for the Homeless are providing wound care on site and some other minor medical help. We have also asked the State Health Department to explore the ways of lifting liability issues for the community clinics that serve the area. And we've been asked to explore whether or not declaring a public health emergency would be in the mix. It doesn't look like it is, but they do have some other solutions, and we're sharing those solutions with the clinics at this time for their reaction. So that brings us to the supervised injection site, which is really a tactic in a harm reduction approach to the opioid epidemic. And so I would be remiss if I weren't to mention that the mayor has formed a multi-jurisdictional team on opioid use, and they will be coming forward with recommendations, and so I want to honor that. But let me turn to the fact sheet that you have. So supervised injection sites, are also known as safe consumption sites or facilities, are designed for people who acquire illegal drugs elsewhere and inject them under the supervision of trained healthcare providers. Planning and advocacy for such facilities in the United States has accelerated recently in response to the rising number of opiate-related overdose deaths. As of July 18th, no sanctioned supervised injection sites have opened in the United States. Because decisions related to official supervision injection sites in the U.S. remain pending, there is no way for us to fully weigh the liability and legality under federal law, but we do have some hints. In December 13th of 2017, the United States Attorney's Office in the District of Vermont stated that the proposed sites would violate federal criminal laws, including those prohibiting use of narcotics and maintaining a premises for the purpose of narcotics use. It is a crime not only to use illicit substances, but to manage and maintain sites on which such drugs are used and distributed. Thus, exposure to criminal charges would arise for users and site workers and overseers. The properties that host sites would also be subject to federal forfeiture. Just this last week, the Department of Justice said that they would take swift and aggressive action against any such approaches. In addition, Minnesota State Chapter 152 addresses drugs and controlled substances, drug paraphernalia, and related crimes. Possession of drug paraphernalia is prohibited by Minnesota statute, which could be interpreted to apply to workers in supervised injection sites. So those are all legal issues that would need to be taken on by the city if this is an approach that we want to pursue. Harm reduction advocates have pointed to the success of sites in other countries in terms of reducing deaths and overdose and increases in getting people into treatment. a recent meta-analysis, which is a meta-analysis is when they look at many studies and kind of pile the studies up on top of each other and see if their findings are pointing in the same direction. It has showed a small positive effect on outcomes. So the reason I started by talking about this as a tactic in a harm reduction strategy is to put this in context and to think about what the positives and the liabilities might be, or the challenges in moving forward, and to urge you to think also of other strategies in concert with that one, so that we might continue to make progress. And I imagine that the multi-jurisdictional team on opioids will bring forward recommendations on those other strategies. Stand for questions.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ellison.
Would you happen to sort of have any detailed knowledge of the site in Vancouver, for instance, that I know a lot of folks highlight as like the successful, like the proof of concept, I guess? Would you have any kind of like details about like whether or not like there's a measurable success there? I know you said overall there's sort of been this small positive, measures of success, but would you know about like any particular site that has had a lot of success or more success than other sites?
We can bring in some information that might exist about that one particular site. My colleagues across the country, I have had many conversations with them and heard presentations from other public health agencies that are looking into this issue, and to date they have not been able to move forward. But I will get you more information about that Vancouver site.
And I mostly wanted to bring this as a conversation. I mean, I would like to come up with a solution that I think is workable. But I know that there's been some conversation around, the barriers to housing, the barriers to shelter, and certainly chemical dependency is one of them. And I think that what I like about this option is that it's an option that, if done in conjunction with shelter or housing, could really help folks not be set up to fail and then lose their shelter or housing. Whereas I'm fearful now that we'll get a lot of folks sort of housed or placed in an emergency sense, and then because of rules around chemical dependency, drug use, we're basically setting them up to fail. Would a basic sort of summary be that that this is globally more or less an effective model, but like Jeff Sessions finds it unsavory? Is that sort of the stance of the federal government?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Ellison, I'm not going to interpret the federal government for you, but I would also add to your maybe list of strategies. I think there's a great deal more we can do with medically assisted treatment, and there have been some recent changes to make it possible for more physicians to be involved in that, and there are issues around the caseload that's allowed for physicians in order to oversee that kind of approach. There are settings in which it could be offered more readily, including criminal justice settings. There are certainly a lot of work's been done in the community already around naloxone availability for not just first responders, but people in the community, and I think that's a step towards a similar harm reduction. There's also interest in the community in fentanyl test strips, so that people can have a better idea of what kind of substances they are exposing themselves to, and certainly all of our needle exchange work that includes clean supplies and alcohol swabs is another small part of harm reduction. And so I think if we can think of that whole package, your goals are ones that we all share. And I think that we have some issues that will require legislative change, but maybe not as insurmountable as it seems like the federal government prohibition is right now.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. Mr. Lilgren, would you like to address this briefly?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, council members. Thank you for taking so much of your time to hear about this issue. And first, I just want to turn to the community members and the residents of the camp and say, Miigwech, for coming down here and for telling those stories. Those were incredible, and for really helping all of us understand what it will take to get to sustainable solutions. And just to pledge on my part and on behalf of the Metro Urban Indian Directors, we look forward to being your partner and helping bring your voice into this conversation. And so I'm Robert Lilligren. I am the CEO of Native American Community Development Institute and also the Vice Chair of the Metro Urban Indian Directors. And I just want to point out there are other MUD, Metro Urban Indian Directors organizations here. Sharon Day of the Indigenous Peoples Task Force, of course, Mary Lagarde from Minneapolis American Indian Center, Dr. Anthony Stately from Native American Community Clinic, and representatives from the American Indian Community Development Corporation as well. And I thought that our guests from the camp really did an incredible job of framing this for us and giving us background, and especially Ashland Delgado, who gave some context and history of the experiences of Native people in this country. And just to remind us that we're talking, it's a big deal for folks to come down here and testify like this. And when you consider that this is government, and it's been government that for centuries has been forcing folks to assimilate and practicing colonization, genocide, forced assimilation, and still is. And this is sort of the result. And I just thought it was beautiful when our sister Rose talked about her hopes and dreams. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what we're really talking about, is trying to give people space to express their hopes and dreams and to live out their hopes and dreams. So I'm really grateful for your help. And I want to say publicly the help of organizations like Natives Against Heroin, who have been incredible at direct outreach and an incredible partner, and the outreach workers at American Indian Community Development Corporation as well. There's a couple of city departments I want to make sure to highlight, and one is the city coordinator's office. And Nuria has just been incredible, and really second Councilmember Kano's comments, and she's been responsive and available. We're almost like best friends now. We talk so often. Yeah, I guess we are like best friends. And then also the MPD, and especially the 3rd Precinct, and Inspector Sullivan, and of course Sergeant Snyder, who's just done incredible work. And so MUD stands as a partner in this, and MUD is a 40-plus year leadership forum in the Native American community, and we've had a number of formal and informal relationships with the city, and we look forward to continuing to work together. And to let you know that the MUD membership have redirected our resources to crisis response when we really don't know where those resources are coming from, but because this is such a phenomenon within the community, we felt it was important to do that. Efforts around communications, coordination, the website that's set up, franklinhiawatha.camp.org, which is a great place for people to go who want to help out or learn more about the camp and specifically what's needed by the residents. The members have set up, as you heard, the hygiene and service area, donor and volunteer coordination, and Minnesota Indians Resource Center, for example, has hired 3 additional staff to help with the community's response and to better interface with the agencies that are looking to help us. And I bring greetings from Patina Park, who is the director of Minnesota Indians Resource Center and the chair of the Metro Urban Indian Directors. You heard it directly from the source what these barriers are, and you know that we need to move forward together to address them. And what my hope is, and I think the hope of many of us, is through this crisis response, we can put systems in place and ways of doing business together that really bring the community voice forward to find the strongest solutions, and that these systems endure beyond the crisis response. So MUD is committed to the plan, the multi-jurisdictional plan that is taking shape for short-term, mid-term, and long-term solutions. We look forward to contributing to innovative, community-based solutions that, once again, will really allow folks to pursue their hopes and dreams. So I'm happy to stand for questions, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the council.
Well, I really appreciate you being here, and I think that the entire council recognizes the key role that MUD's been playing in this. So the leadership and the ability to engage and get involved and participate in this has been critical, I think, to us moving forward, as will the continued partnership going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
It looks like one of your other fellow directors may want to speak.
This is Dr. Anthony Staken.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Councilman Gordon and the rest of the council. I appreciate the opportunity to give you a couple words. Ever since this encampment or the Wall of Forgotten Natives has come to my attention 3 to 4 weeks ago, I've been working tirelessly and furiously, morning, noon, and night, sometimes sleeping 4 hours a night, 5 hours a night, and sacrificing time with my family and my children to try and find a solution for medical services at that encampment. I've been asking for resources from the city, from the state, and from the county to help me in that regard. And some folks have stepped up, and I think that we've got some, the beginning of some things happening there. It's taken a long time to get that far, but I wanted to really quickly kind of let you know that I've been working through back channels with relationships with tribes who have stepped out and said that they want to help support their relatives in the urban core. I came close to having a solution for some of on-site medical services through a relationship with one tribe, but then had to drop back from that plan a couple weeks ago. But I formed a relationship. NAC and another private entity has formed a relationship with the Red Lake Nation, and we will be out in the encampment on Monday providing 8 hours of medical on-site services Monday through Friday. And we've created a financial structure that will support that. So we're really excited about that. We're excited that tribes and community and private entities have come together to solve that conundrum. We'll be releasing a press release about that by the end of the week and announcing that structure publicly. But I wanted to really quickly make some comments about the conversation around safer injection and safer consumption sites. The evidence worldwide shows and demonstrates that the significant benefit of having safer consumption sites in a situation such as the one we are facing right now with the opiate crisis in our country. In other countries all over the world, throughout Europe, throughout other countries, and even third world countries where they practice these practices. It's been a practice that has demonstrated the capacity to save lives and help people get into healthcare. In my own clinic, we got a grant about a year ago from the county, or actually the state, the Minnesota Department of Health, gave us a safer use grant to help us do syringe services within our community. And recently we augmented that contract to start doing hepatitis C screenings and also HIV screenings. But one of the things we learned when we started doing syringe services in our clinic in a harm reduction model was we found a couple of really significant things. Almost immediately we found that some of the people that were coming in for syringe services hadn't been connected to primary care in over a year or two, sometimes 3 years. We were able to identify and get a number of patients who had used to be NAC patients and be connected to primary care with significant chronic care conditions that were greater and more impactful than even just their OUD disorder. Things like uncontrolled diabetes, uncontrolled asthma, a number of other things. Uncontrolled asthma, of course, seems to be the situation or the condition that may have led to Alyssa. What is her last name? I'm going to mess up her last name. Yes, her death last week. And so one of the things I've been really invested in is within this work that I'm doing with NAC and in partnership with a lot of our community partners, including NAW and Southside Harm Reduction and a few other folks, is to try to do our best to use harm reduction services, including safer consumption sites if we were to invest in that, as a mechanism to actually get people back into care and continue to provide life-saving, immediate life-saving acute strategies to save their lives, but also reestablish them in care and continue to provide ongoing care and helps resolve other conditions that lead to significantly higher rates of mortality. What we've been able to see is that we've my staff have revived people in our parking lot with Narcan. They've revived people. We've seen a significant uptick since we agreed to be the location and the site that would take dirty needles and dispose of them with increased support from the state and the county and the city. We've seen a significant uptick in needles coming into our clinic. That's a critical thing for us to pay attention to because in South Minneapolis, our streets, our parks are littered with needles, with dirty needles, which poses a significant hazard to children and other people who just are walking in public areas. So a safer consumption site, while it is challenging, right, for the things that you said, Jeff Sessions has come out and said that he would, significantly swoop quickly. I would really, ask the council to consider and weigh this challenge. It's not an easy decision to make, but it's one of the most humane things that we could do. And it's probably one of the most swiftest things we could do to actually end people from dying or end overdoses, and we could and significantly end overdoses, and also protect more vulnerable people who live in the areas where we're seeing one of the most prolific sort of like drug conditions in our community. 55404, the zip code in Minneapolis, where Lillard and this encampment and my clinic serve the people in that area. That's ground zero in the urban area for opiate overdoses. Native Americans suffer from opiate overdoses in the state of Minnesota, 6 to 7 times greater than the rest of the population. Nationwide, when we look at the 10 top Native American communities across the United States, in terms of the highest rates of overdoses, Minnesota is 2 to 3 times higher than the next second state. So we have a crisis here that is of epic proportions right here in your backyard. And I'm asking you to please consider your thoughts and your votes carefully and be brave and be courageous and put a stake in the ground and save some lives. So thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you being here. Councilmember Ellison.
I'm not going to give a staff direction or anything about this, but I do want to be, let folks know that I will be following up on this. I think that I'm glad that we had a medical professional come up and able to and our staff is also medical professionals, health professionals, so I'm not making any kind of statement there. But just to affirm sort of this as a solution, I think is really important. When I've been mentioning this the last couple of weeks, I feel like I've had a handful of people look at me like I'm pro heroin or something, and I don't think that that's the goal. The goal is that this could potentially be a prerequisite to treatment, right? And I think that fentanyl strips and some of the other harm reduction tactics are great tactics. We should be doing them, but I don't want to see us house people in an emergency situation, put certain restrictions that they chemically cannot meet. And then when we find paraphernalia in their rooms or wherever, we put them back out on the street and make speeches about personal responsibility. It might be an unsavory solution, but is a Hep C outbreak less unsavory? Is HIV less unsavory? I don't think so. And so I want to thank you for your words, and this is definitely something that I'm going to be following up with my colleagues and staff. And again, thank you.
I appreciate that, and I think maybe it will certainly be coming up as the opioid task force brings back their results, and we'll continue working on that. I do want to deal with some of the issues that were in the recommendations having to do with housing. So I want to do more than receive and file this report. I want to move a staff direction that I think there are some available there, and my colleagues should have in front of them, directing the city coordinator and CPID director to work with health and finance staff to develop implementation plans for the establishment and operation of the two projects that were outlined in the report. One, for one or more navigation center to provide emergency transitional services to address the immediate needs of the residents of the Hiawatha encampment that includes low barrier access to emergency beds, basic health care, and other support services. And secondly, one or more culturally focused and informed transitional housing options focused on serving American Indian individuals and families suffering from chronic homelessness. Now, I would like the staff to report back on September 20th. That's at our Committee of the Whole meeting, at least with an update about the Emergency Navigation Center. I think that's key and it's critical. And if we expect to have anything in place by October 1st, which seems unlikely, this isn't all in the staff direction, but this is we'll have to have some big decisions probably made by the 20th to know what's happening. And I would also like to have the a timeline, the costs, and the funding sources for that as soon as possible. In terms of the other project, the transitional housing project, I'm directing staff to report back to this committee on October 24th with an implementation plan. For both of those, staff should present 2 implementation scenarios. I think it's important that we hear one scenario that doesn't include resources from the county, and then another that does, and hopefully we'll be hearing about that. And I know there's a couple people from the county here, but we really need some nimbleness, some creativity, and some help quickly. And then finally, we're expecting staff to work directly with a diverse range of community residents groups and leaders, just as they have been, and others who are supporting the encampment residents, as well as the residents themselves, to assist in determining the programmatic requirements of the Navigation Center and the longer-term transitional housing project. So with the specific language before committee members, do you have any questions on that or comments? Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm very supportive of your motion. I appreciate the fact that you were able to put into context an actionable item with a very limited timeline in order to be able to move forward. I do have a couple of comments, however. First of all, I've learned from Councilmember Lilligren that the most important thing we can do is to not overpromise or make promises that we cannot keep to the community. And I see a lot of staff shaking their heads, which I'm sure is what you've learned from people that you've been working with out in the encampment. And it's important for us to move slowly to ensure that when we say we're going to do something, we actually do it. We follow through and we make sure that all the pieces are in place. And this is why I very much appreciate the general staff direction. I do want to note, though, that on item number 2, one or more culturally focused and informed transitional housing options, if that is some sort of permanent housing, let's not make that promise today, because there is no possibility by October 24th that we'll be able to work as fast as possible to allocate the 9% tax credits available, that someone will allocate the rental assistance required in order to make a project like that succeed. And while we will work to do so, those of you who have worked in the housing movement know it takes many years, under the best of circumstances, more than a year, to get a permanent transitional housing option on the table, primarily because of the lack of federal support for federal and local housing rental assistance, which seems to be a big piece of this. When there are a lot of people dealing with a lot of challenges in their lives, they don't have the resources to pay rent, and we need to find rental assistance to help them succeed, which makes whatever the short-term transitional, or I would call it shelter-like option, all that more important, because it will take longer than anyone wishes to have a permanent solution. Which brings me to a question about the county. So I guess I'm going to call out the elephant in the room that no one else is willing to call out. I don't see any leadership from the county here. Dave, I think you're great, and I respect the work you're doing, but you're not the county administrator. You're not an elected official, right? And I'm frustrated that a primary activity of the county is dealing with homelessness. And this is the ultimate in homelessness crisis. And I am grateful that Councilmember Cano and Councilmember Warsame and the mayor have stepped up. But the truth of the matter is the county is twice the size of the city. And it's ironic that they're building, a train for $1.9 billion while homeless people are sleeping on the train. It's very, very frustrating. And so we will do our part, because the city has learned through our colleagues like Councilmember Lilligren that trust between the American Indian community and the city had lacked years ago, has built up to the best place it's ever been. And in many ways, you trust this entity of government, you want to work with us, but we don't have the deepest pockets. And we should hold our colleagues at other levels of government accountable for stepping up, because we will not be able to pay for this ourselves. This is an emergency, and there needs to be a very broad-based response to it. And I definitely do not want to make promises that we cannot keep. That would break my heart as someone who works on housing, to tell everyone, especially those wonderful people in the room who stepped up and told these highly personal stories about what's happened in your lives on TV, in front of the media, and in front of all sorts of other people. You bared your souls to us, and our responsibility now is to hear that voice and to try to work with you in an honest and compassionate way. And so I would urge us, our incredible public health commissioner, our city coordinator, and our CPED director, as well as the good folks in the police department, to implore upon the county to step up now. This is the time. We don't need this kind of, maybe they need this kind of report to hear and look into the faces of the people who are sitting in front of us to understand that we need to do something. And so I'm appreciative of what Councilmember Gordon has done. I think it's important for us to move fast but incrementally, and making sure that every promise we make we can keep, because it's getting cold and people's lives are depending on the actions that we take. So thank you, Councilmember Gordon, for moving this forward today. I wholeheartedly support the efforts you've put forward.
Well, you're very welcome. I wholeheartedly support the sentiments in your speech. Appreciate that. Council President Bender? Or Councilmember Connell?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to clarify, because I worked with you on coming up with some of the language here, is that the staff report that we're hoping to get on the 20th is to present a plan for the thing we have to do now, to support people and to house people now, so they're no longer intense, so we have something that's a little bit more stable, something that can give us some breathing room to then think about what is that longer systems change strategy, where we are exploring, for example, when I met with residents, they expressed interest in building their own homes. And we have a proposal from the community to do long houses, and we have other ideas to maybe do the Habitat for Humanity model, to pilot different ideas in scattered sites that involve creative approaches at how to solve this long-term issue. So the October 24th deadline is not to have the thing ready. The October 24th deadline is to have a plan of how we're going to approach that longer conversation of where do folks get housed on a more long-term basis. So I just wanted to clarify that there's two tracks here. One track is, what are we going to do in 3 weeks? What are we going to have available for folks to move into in 3 weeks? And then the October 24th deadline is more connected to what is that long-term plan that we have to address a lot of the different issues that we've been learning about and seeing, and maybe revisiting through the conversations we've been having, through the visits we've hosted at the campsite, and through hearing from the residents who are impacted today. So just clarification. And then I just wanted to see if the chair would entertain an amendment to this. I don't formally sit in the committee, so I'm going to have to rely on you for the procedures of how to do this. But I think it'd be important to add 4 words to item number 1. So after one or more navigation centers, adding prioritizing city-owned property to provide emergency transitional services, et cetera, et cetera. And the intent there is to own up to the fact that we as council members have purview over large land stock in the city through city-owned property and city-owned boarded up and vacant lots and properties. And so I don't want to kick the can to the county. I don't want to kick the can to the schools or to MPHA. I want to be held responsible for the power and the position and the responsibility that we have here today to our residents who have come, to our residents who have survived extremely traumatic events, poverty issues that we've tried to address through minimum wage and other forms. So I just want to see if we can please prioritize that, codify that, and give our staff a clear message that, yes, we need to seriously entertain city-owned land as part of housing the community who are here today.
I'm comfortable putting that into the motion if there aren't any objections from committee members, rather than voting on it separately. It says prioritize, so that leaves flexibility. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I heard our city coordinator say there were lots of options on the table and that they weren't sure about what the solutions were. And suggesting that we put this in suggests we're moving in one direction over another, and I object to that. I heard our staff get up and say, don't do that. We got a letter that I didn't even get till it was just passed out. We don't know that that's the best solution. We don't know what the solution is. I don't know what the solution is, but we have just a short period of time when they're reporting back to us. Today is already what is today? I don't even know anymore. The 12th.
8 days.
So we're talking 8 days. So I think within 8 days, we can come up with a solution or at least an idea of whether or not the Roof Depot site or a different site makes sense without trying to direct staff as to what one council member or the community's preferred option is. We don't know what the situation is with that right now. I understand Councilmember Cano knows, but the rest of us don't, and this is new information to us.
So we could, Councilmember
I'm talking
Cano.
about the Roof Depot site, not the encampment site itself.
Right. Councilmember Cano has a comment.
So I don't want us to be afraid to let Native American people have access to their own land. So let's not do that today, okay?
If you're your family, what would you do sitting there in the camp? If it was your family that got your land taken from you less than 100 years ago, and your grandma was crying and saying, this is where my land is gone, and then you guys get to sit here in your houses. Some of these people here today sitting on the board have people on government from years and years ago, and this is our First Nations home. In order to be able to live, yes, we should think about emergency aid.
They're using stolen land as a goddamn fucking election speech. It's not an election speech. It actually means something.
That's our land.
This is our land, and you're on it. You're on it.
People cost too much money. It's too hard for us to be able to come up with the pennies or whatever it costs to be able to do that. Then why not think about open areas? Why not think about options of parking lots with nothing but grass?
So I think everybody is thinking of those options. So we're just having a discussion about adding 5 words or not to the action. Whether or not, I think the disagreement is what will get us to a piece of property more quickly that we can actually use. And so that's, I want us to get a chance to have the discussion so we can vote on it. Councilmember Cano.
So I wanted to clarify. I wanted to clarify for Councilmember Goodman and for the public record and the community here that saying you're prioritizing city-owned property doesn't mean you omit. It means you prioritize. And that is the purview that we have as council members right now to solve an issue that is happening and festering in our community and has been going on for a long time. So let's not misinform folks. Prioritization means that you're looking at a list of things, and number 1 will be city-owned property. Secondly, the letter. I apologize if you just got the letter from the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors today. It is my understanding that this letter was delivered to the mayor a few days ago. I don't know the date. I happened to get a copy of this letter by accident last night. And as soon as I got it and I was able to read it, I forwarded it on to the rest of the council members. And so it's important to note that, yes, here in this letter, the Metropolitan Urban Indian Directors are asking for the Roof Depot site. I don't think that should fall on deaf ears. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that, to acknowledge the memorandum, the actual agreement, the contractual agreement and government agreement we have between the city of Minneapolis and MUD. So that, for the public record, I wanted to be clear that that is the intent and the context of the actions I've presented today.
So I think it makes total sense that we look carefully at public land, and I'm sure that it would rise to a certain level. I'm wondering if we could perhaps change the wording and say 1 or more navigation center, including careful consideration of city-owned property. Do you think that that would address your concerns, Councilmember Goodman, and still highlight it? Instead of prioritize, we just say include careful consideration of? I'm going to make that motion then. I'll move that I'll make that a motion I'll just use the chair's prerogative and add the language to point 1 before you where it says 1 or more navigation center. I will say including careful consideration of city-owned property, and then the rest of it will go on. So with that before you, that restated motion, Council President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm not sure everyone got to hear the language that you just described, so I'll just acknowledge that and apologize for the side conversation we were having here. I wanted to say a couple things, and I will direct it specifically to the motion you just made. First, I did want to thank Councilmember Cano and Warsami for their leadership, and also the mayor's office in dealing with what I think has become known as a crisis, but I think, as we've heard so powerfully from community today, has been a crisis for a long time. And I want to acknowledge what Councilmember Cano and many speakers said, which is that the city of Minneapolis is located on Indigenous land, and the city of Minneapolis has taken many actions in the past to voice our acknowledgement of the sovereignty of First Nations, and that is the framework in which we are operating, with the sovereignty as the center of our understanding of how we're interacting as government entities. I think that there's more agreement here than this maybe 5 words is demonstrating, and so I just want to say that, you know, this is a new area for the city of Minneapolis to step into, to the idea that we would take on responsibility for providing emergency shelter. That would be a new function for the city to do. The idea that we would engage in setting up medical facilities or helping to operate them, that would be a very new function for the city. And almost certainly we would be doing it in partnership with community organization, with folks who have more expertise than the city does today. And I also just wanted to echo what Councilmember Goodman said, which is that, you know, as city leaders, I know that we all want to step up and do the right thing in any moment, but we also feel so much pressure from the failure from decades of so many government agencies and the continued, you know, the federal government is not only walking away from our communities, they're attacking our communities, and the burden that that is shifting to the city, and our desire to not be only reactive in this moment, but to set up sustainable systems that are investing in community for the long term. And so I think anything that you hear along the lines of hesitation or managing expectations is our commitment and desire to create solutions that are sustainable and that are acknowledging and addressing the generational root causes of why you're here today. And the statement that Councilmember Cano made, which is that it is not an accident that so many people at the encampment are Native American or from our American Indian population, that is the direct result of oppression that the community has experienced, and it is our responsibility to directly confront that oppression in a way that is sustainable and builds power for the community in the long term. So I want to make sure that we stay centered on those values that I know that we share as council members, and as we find our way to what the specifics on this page say, that is the root of our commitment that we're making today. And again, thank you to Councilmember Cano for making it clear that the city of Minneapolis is stepping up in leadership right now. So all that said, I would support the alternative description that Councilmember Gordon just offered. I understand from our staff that they've been working with the county, with the school board, with private landowners, with basically anyone, anywhere that we could find to help to try to create a temporary shelter. And I think no one wants to close any of those doors, and we support those efforts of our staff, and particularly the time sensitivity and need to be nimble as we make decisions, even maybe in the next few days. So I don't think it's in the intention of the committee to stop any of those conversations, but I also take to heart Councilmember Cano's desire that we are clear that if we can't get the support of other partners, that the city is still committed to moving forward and taking action as soon as needed. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I don't see necessarily any other comments. I just wanted to say one expectation that I have about this emergency facility. The closer that we can have it located to that area, I think is going to meet the needs better. So I was a little worried in the presentation when we talked about making sure we could get people from one place to another, imagining far distant places where we'd have a tent somewhere. And I don't think that that's necessarily going to work. But you've also been directed to work with the stakeholders and the residents who are more involved. And hopefully, if that's true, my hunch, that will bear fruit, and you'll be hearing that. So I just wanted to say that, acknowledging that you need some flexibility to do that work and to move forward with that. And that's not going to be the last word. Councilmember.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did also had intended to say this, which is that I think as we think about how we're defining success, you know, that the goal of our work here is not to end the encampment, that the goal of our work is to create sustainable solutions to house people, to get people the jobs and support and health services that they need. And so if we think about this as ending an encampment or moving people from one place to another place, that will never really be a successful approach. So just again, some of the language in the staff direction is really focused on the immediacy of folks who are at the encampment, and I know that is a priority for now, but I think we should just keep in mind that long-term piece and understanding that that there has been an urgency for a long time, and there will continue to be. Beyond the people who are at the camp now, we have people living unsheltered throughout our city, and we need to make sure that we're focused on everyone.
And I'm sure we could talk a lot longer about this and all the other details about it, but I think we're ready to have the vote. Let's vote on the staff direction, and then we'll receive and file, and then we'll end the meeting. So all those in favor of the staff direction as amended, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say no. That motion carries then. I will then move to receive and file the report. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. This meeting is adjourned.
Yeah, right.